Now we're drilling the hole for the screw in the large loveless bolt at about a 1.5 degree taper. I've got the mosaic tube left in the hardwood there. That just helps line up all of the hole spacings so that they're going to be within 1/1000th of an inch of where they need to be. So now we got to do the other side. I'll always use the exact same hardware that I'm going to use in the knife, just for tolerances. Got the scribe lines back here, and that's where I'm going to line it up for the grain orientation. So I try to always superimpose that with the edges of the blank before I start drilling. That'll make it look a little more finished. Once you get closer to the surface, you got to slow down the feed rate. And here comes the moment of truth.
Okay, what you doing there, Gary?
I am basically dry fitting it, for lack of a better term, to make sure that all of the angles were drilled properly. Because with it being a tapered tang, if I'm off by more than about 1/2 degree, it won't go together and it won't be without any gaps. So if I did this properly, now that I have a camera on me, so at this point of the dry fitting, we're using the actual bolt from the loveless bolt with the mosaic tube and your hardware, and we can hold it up to the light, any light source, and look for a gap between the tang and the handle material here. You should be able to see a gap as a little strip of light that's if the gap is more than about 1/1000th of an inch thick. We saw a very tiny bit on one side only, but these aren't compressed together, and since we didn't see it on the other side, that just tells me my handles are on a little crooked without them being clamped. But since all this is going together, I know that all of these holes are absolutely perpendicular to the center line of this tapered tang, which also means they should come out perfectly perpendicular to the scale sets after we flatten them off to accommodate for the tapered tang. And
Okay.
at this point, we're ready to start drilling the larger holes for the loveless bolts.
All right. We'll wait for that.
Alright, so there's a little bit of a bevel there. You're going to want that so that you can work up your finer drips. And the reason I'm moving is because the belt will bow in the middle. and it'll actually create kind of a convex flat grind like that.
Okay.
So I'm actually only working the belt on like this third. And up that 20, I have to spend probably 1.5 to 2 just mixing it. Because if I get all hardener or all resin, that's going to create a weak spot in the epoxy and it won't actually set. Which is why I scrape all the side walls and I constantly scrape the bottom. When I'm done, it should look more like foam than a liquid. So the quicker you mix it, the better it'll.
So we're in the glue up phase.
Yep. From this point forward, it's 100% commitment. Whatever mistakes you make in this phase can only be fixed by sawing it apart. There's really not a lot of room for error. You really don't need a whole lot, but you want to make sure that literally 100% of this surface is wet. Anywhere that's not wet is because it doesn't have epoxy on it. You want epoxy from one edge of the knife to the other. Because my scale set is well oversized from the final product, I really don't care if it makes a mess on the outside of these scales. Sometimes it matters. You know, like my stag handled Woodsman, I couldn't get any epoxy on the outside of those. But for this one, it really doesn't matter because it's all going to get ground off when I shape it.
Right. Okay.
So I'm perfectly fine if this makes a huge mess. What I really want is an adequate job of glue up. And however that happens, that happens. So sometimes
So you're coating the hardware as well.
I coat everything. The mosaics are tricky because they have a hole, and that hole during the glue up process will also get epoxy in it. So you have to make sure you come back at the end before it sets up and you clean that out with a Q-tip with acetone. Also, my hands get a lot of epoxy on them. And you have to make certain that that doesn't touch the blade in any area that you don't remember to clean up, or you have epoxy impregnated on your knife blade that obviously looks really trashy. You don't really want that. At this point, it should be a tight enough fit that it might actually need just a little encouragement, which is what I have the hammer for. This nut, I'm just rolling it around in some excess epoxy on the table. Because this nut is so slippery, I use a pair of pliers just to keep the nut from rotating, and I can actually just screw it in with a screwdriver.
This is the loveless bolt fastener process, correct?
Yes, this is the loveless bolt, and you can see on the offside that that nut is just getting closer and closer and closer as the screw is pulling through. And eventually my pliers won't have anything left to grab a hold of. We're already getting close to there. Yeah. I've drilled these holes tight enough that at this point there actually may be enough friction that I can continue to back that in. I can, just by surface tension.
Okay.
Which is exactly what I was hoping for, because these handle fronts are going to be tapered down enough. That's going to give me the depth that I need. Okay, now you're also going to see this mosaic lanyard tube. Purpose of hammering is mostly just to help make sure everything is super flat. Flat is absolutely vital. So if it's not flat, you're going to see a glue up lamination lines. So we come back. I like to use a bench vise. The bench vise helps apply even pressure throughout the entire length of the handle, which creates a little bit of a stronger glue up than I've been able to get with spring clamps or C-clamps or something like that, because I've never been able to get a perfectly consistent amount of pressure on both sides of the blade, meaning the front or the rear, because I'm having two clamps do the surface clamp. When I went to doing a bench vise, I've got a 4-inch jaw against a 4-inch handle. Those jaws are perfectly parallel, and so I wind up getting a much more consistent clamping force, and that's resulted in a little bit fewer glue up lines kind of poking through after I grind the scale set down flush with the Tang.
Tell us what you're doing there.
I'm running acetone on a Q-tip through the lanyard hole of your mosaic tube, because again there's epoxy that's oozing out everywhere, and when I insert that tube it pulls some epoxy into the hole, which obviously looks really crummy and it prevents the lanyard from working. If there's an issue there, you can actually correct that by using an appropriate size drill bit to drill out leftover epoxy, but that leaves the inside of your lanyard tube scratched a little bit or scored from the drill bit, which is better than an epoxy buildup, but it just doesn't look good. So you prevent it by making sure you use acetone to strip all of that out during the glue up process, and you avoid the problem rather than have to fix it.
I understand that. It's wiping off the excess epoxy off the part of the scales.
Yep, because that's going to continue to ooze out. Now, as that's clamping, I'm adding force to the tops here. My purpose for that is I'm clamping on the bottom, and I want the most consistent clamping force that I can get in terms of weight, of pressure, in addition to having as much contact area clamping as possible, because mechanically that winds up producing fewer glue up lines. And as you see me take this in a little bit, you can actually see just a tiny bit of glue starting to ooze out up here by this false guard. If I hadn't have added that extra clamp, the asymmetrical clamping force would have shown a glue line on the inside of your handle, which would have been really small, but it would have been present. You add a little more force to even that up, and all of a sudden that glue line's going to disappear. Which there will still be glue there, you just won't be able to see the glue. It'll make a better finish. So my next step is I basically want to sight down the inside of this, and I want to make sure that there is some degree of glue all the way around the Tang. If there is not, then it's because I did a poor job gluing up. But I see glue everywhere.
Okay.
That's good. Checking my handle fronts. They're completely dry, that's what we want. Checking my glue up lines. This one has none. Back here I see a little bit of one. So, come in with a Q-tip. It sometimes helps to rip the fluffy part off the Q-tip when it's a really thin glue up line like that, because then you can use that harder stick. You can see that tiny little glob right there. You can use that stick to create a sharper border than the fluffy part of the glue or Q-tip can get, and it'll kind of make that glue up line a little prettier. Hear that Ironwood just bogging down my poor little bandsaw. So we're hitting the scribe lines that we put in. If you remember when we did that, these should actually be oversized by a little less than a 1/16 of an inch. Alright, so here's the repair. This was the really big one that was pretty deep, and I need to touch it up just a little bit more. There was another one somewhere over here, and honestly I can't even find it anymore. And then the little spot we patched back here was somewhere in there, and it's just pretty much gone too. So we're going to come back and we're going to pack that with one more round of super glue. And then we've got ironwood dust from this same piece of ironwood for a perfect color match. And after that, it'll be time to flatten this scale and come through and start shaping the handle. So just get it damp. I use the thinnest viscosity super glue that I can get. The purpose of that is I really want it to kind of suck down into the crack as much as possible. And then the end of a Q-tip provides a hard surface that's small enough it lets me really tamp down this dust and get it kind of pounded into the cracks. Because I don't really want it on the surface of the knife. I'm going to grind most of this off, but I want that dust to be inside the flaw. And the only way to get it there is to kind of smush it in. And I don't use my fingers to do it, because then I wind up gluing dust all over my fingers and it takes a couple days for that to fall off. Quickly be moving up into finer grit belts and getting away from this really aggressive ceramic belt. That's the only edge that I can do with that. I've got to move over to a small wheel. So here I'm undercutting this, again, to just create clearance for your fingers. Your fingers have to have a place to go.
Now we're on the final sharpening.
Yeah, we're at near the final sharpening. We're going to wind up doing a stropped edge on this when I'm done, but this particular belt should be about 1200 grit. And always when I get done, I like to look at the tip, make sure that's got a perfectly symmetrical sharpening. It does. You can also look at the thickness of the secondary bevel. It's consistent all the way around. That's great. Consistent on both sides. Right now this should be shaving sharp, but I'm going to take it a little bit beyond that with the power strop. Some folks say that power strops are bad. Honestly, I'd use them so lightly that I really don't think there's any risk of it burning the edge, because I'm using a super light touch at a super slow speed and not for very long. So I always strop my edge. It gives you the same benefits off of a machine that it would by hand. The downside is you can see the leather belt kind of wobbles a lot.
Yeah.
And that's just because it's a natural material and it kind of stretches over time. And
yeah, varies in thickness.
yeah, they're just really not as consistent, which is why I try to take it all the way up to 1200 on a more consistent belt that'll allow me to get into the sharpening groove without over sharpening or rounding that out.
Gotcha.
And then from here, I'm really only working the edge of that belt. I'm not really making contact anywhere in the center. And I actually use this little bit of a plunge line against the edge of that, because the edges aren't actually going to be abrasive or polished. They have no compound on them.
Okay.
And I'll use that to kind of guide it into that sharpening notch just a touch. So I've done one pass on one side. I usually come back and do 3 passes total. The purpose of this is not only to polish that edge just a little bit, but get rid of any burr that may be there. It only takes a second, but it kind of makes a difference between your knife being shaving sharp and able to split hairs. Just produces a little bit cleaner edge, cleaner look. So that's my 3rd time. This knife should be ready to go.
You got something you want to test it on?
Yeah, always test an edge. That's 1/4 inch thick 3V, which isn't, you'd think 1/4 inch thick steel shouldn't really be able to slice this well, but got it sharpened down to about 15 thousandths behind the main cutting edge.
Yeah, it's going right through that paper stock like
So it's
hot butter.
It's pretty thin at the leading edge, and that flat grind lets it get pretty close. I think it's ready to go.
Awesome. Yeah. Final stage is the oil dip. Oh my goodness, look at that.
And I'm gonna let most of that just kind of run off. And then from here, I basically just burnish it in by hand.
Okay. I'll tell you what, the grain figure looked great before the oil dip. It's going to be pretty amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, the oil has a way of bringing things out that, I mean, just kind of like the buffing does.
Yeah.
But the oil will bring stuff out that the buffing left behind.
As
And
far as beauty?
yeah, it kind of creates a little bit of depth in the character.
Okay.
It makes all the chatoyance look a little more 3D. It makes all of the fiddleback lines a little more reflective, like a hologram.
Okay.
And tactily, that oil will kind of, to a degree, help smooth out the surface. And instead of it feeling smooth like glass, it'll make it more silky like a baby's bottom.
Okay.
So it just feels better. It looks better, it feels better. In a lot of ways it is better. And, I'm gonna put this on by hand. I have no abrasives here. I'm not sanding, I'm not changing the dimensions. I'm really just creating heat by friction.
Okay.
And I'm doing it kind of randomly. And trying to work that oil into whatever tiny little pores may be on the surface of the natural material as it is.
Gotcha.
This is boiled linseed oil, so it'll probably take it a couple days to fully cure. But it's going to be on the handle so lightly that you can honestly just start using it immediately.
Okay. And then we just take like a light fabric like that t-shirt there and just buff it in a couple of days when it's fully...
It really shouldn't even need that.
Okay.
should just be good to go. And ironwood is naturally a very oily wood as it is.
Okay.
And the solvents, the Neutralite from my etching machine, stuff like that, has a tendency to strip the oils off of the surface of the wood. This
Okay.
basically just replaces them.
Gotcha.
And it's not going to penetrate into the wood very far, if at all. And just kind of makes it look a little better.
Yeah.
So it can come out in the light. So there it is in the light. Nice good handle contouring all the way around. Lots of good grain and figure. Quite a few little gold flakes or chatoyance marks. The book matching on all of these grain lines is pretty spot on.
Looks awesome, Garrett.
It's a pretty sharp looking knife.
Absolutely. And the ergonomics, the